Mom, we're doing Thanksgiving at Derek's parents' this year. Just his side of the family. You understand, right? I held the phone against my ear and didn't say anything for a moment. Through the kitchen window, I could see the maple tree in the backyard, the one Gerald planted the year our daughter was born. It had turned a deep, burning red overnight. I'd been meaning to tell her about it. She used to love that tree. Of course, I said. That makes sense. You're not upset? I'm fine, Claire. Enjoy your holiday. She exhaled, relieved, the way people do when they've been rehearsing something difficult and it goes easier than expected. We'll get together soon, okay? Maybe in December. We'll figure something out. Sounds good, I said. She hung up. I set the phone down on the counter next to a notepad where I'd written, in my own handwriting, the grocery list I'd already started building. Sweet potatoes. Heavy cream. The good turkey from the butcher on Route 9, I'd already called ahead to reserve it. 2 pounds of fresh green beans because Tyler said last year that the canned ones tasted like metal, and I'd made a note of that. I remembered things like that. I always did. I folded the list in half and slid it under the notepad. Then I stood very still in my kitchen for a little while, listening to the refrigerator hum. Gerald had been gone for 3 years now. 3 Thanksgivings without him sitting at the head of the table, wearing that ridiculous pilgrim hat Tyler had made him in 2nd grade, refusing to take it off until the dishes were cleared. He'd always been the one who made things feel like occasions. I thought I'd been doing a decent job of carrying that on. I was wrong about a lot of things, it turned out. The drive to the grocery store that afternoon was automatic. My hands knew the route. I'd been making that trip for 40 years. First with a station wagon full of kids' sports equipment, then alone after the girls grew up, then with Gerald on Saturday mornings when we had nowhere particular to be, now alone again. With a list that was already half written and a turkey reservation I needed to cancel. I didn't cancel it. I don't know why. I pulled into the parking lot, sat in the car for a few minutes with the engine off, and then I went inside. The store was decorated for fall. Gourds and dried corn bundled near the entrance, a display of apple cider stacked by the door. An older gentleman in a vest was handing out samples of pumpkin bread. He smiled at me and I took a piece, even though I wasn't hungry. "Getting ready for the holiday?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. I moved through the aisles slowly. Sweet potatoes, a bag of fresh cranberries, the heavy cream. I stood in front of the turkey display for a long time, looking at the different sizes. You need a big bird for a crowd. For one person, you need something else entirely, something you can manage, something that doesn't make the table look abandoned. I picked up the largest one they had in the cooler and put it in my cart. On the way home, I thought about the first Thanksgiving after Gerald died. Claire had come, with Derek and the kids, and she'd been efficient about it in a way that felt kind at the time. She'd brought pre-made sides from a restaurant, the kind that come in labeled containers, and she'd arranged everything on my good dishes so it looked homemade. I hadn't said anything. She meant well. Or I thought she meant well. The year after that, they came again, but left before 7 because Tyler had a soccer tournament the next morning, and they needed the kids in bed. I stood on the porch in November air watching their minivan pull away, and thought, this is what it is now. This is how it goes. Last year, Claire called 2 days beforehand to say Lily had a fever and they couldn't make it. I'd already cooked. I packed everything into containers and drove it to my neighbor Ruth's house, where her son was visiting, and we ate together around her small table, and it was actually lovely. But that's beside the point. The point is that this year, Claire didn't pretend there was a reason. She just said it plainly. Derek's family. His side. You understand, right? And I understood. Completely. I just wasn't sure she understood what she was saying. I got home, put the groceries away, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't drink. On the wall across from me, there's a photo Gerald took of Claire when she was about 8 years old, standing in front of that maple tree in a pile of leaves up to her knees, laughing at something off camera. I'd had it framed years ago, and hung it there because it captured something true about her, the way she looked when she was purely, uncalculatedly happy. I looked at that photo for a long time. Then I got up and started making a pie crust. Claire had Derek's parents, who were lovely people. Reasonable, easygoing, the kind of couple who sent Christmas cards with actual news in them instead of just a photo. His mother, Patricia, made a green bean casserole from scratch and always brought two because someone always asked for the recipe and she wanted to leave them with a copy. I liked Patricia. I had no argument with Patricia. My argument was quieter than that. It wasn't even an argument. It was more like a slow accumulation, a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing it had a shape. I thought about the summer 2 years ago when Claire called in a panic because the transmission had gone out on their SUV and they didn't have the money to cover the repair. Derek had just started a new job and the first paycheck hadn't come through yet. I'd transferred $1,200 without being asked twice. I told her to pay me back whenever. She never mentioned it again. I never brought it up. I thought about the year before that, when they were short on the mortgage payment, and couldn't tell Derek's parents without it becoming a whole ordeal. I covered $600. Just this once, Claire said. Just to get us through. She'd said that phrase a few times over the years. Just to get us through. Like there was always a storm, and I was always the shelter. I thought about the trip to Florida 2 springs ago, when I'd offered to watch the kids for a week, so they could have time together as a couple, 7 days. I drove Tyler to 3 different activities and took Lily to the doctor when she woke up with an ear infection, sat in the waiting room for 2 hours with a coloring book between us. When Claire called to check in, she asked about the kids first, the house second, and didn't ask about me at all. I told myself she was tired. She was on vacation. People don't think clearly when they're finally resting. I told myself a lot of things over the years. The pie crust came together the way it always did. Cold butter, cold hands, flour on my forearms. Gerald used to say my pie crust was the only reason he stayed married to me. He said it every time, like it was the first time, and every time I laughed like it was new. I miss that about him. Not just the joke, but the way he looked at me when he made it, like he was the luckiest man in any room he happened to be standing in. I put the crust in the refrigerator to rest and went to sit in the living room. The house was quiet, in the particular way that houses get quiet in fall, like everything is settling in for something long. I'd lived in this house for 31 years. Gerald and I bought it when Claire was 3, and her sister was just born. We'd painted every room twice, refinished the floors, built the deck in the backyard where we'd had every summer birthday party, every graduation cookout, every Sunday afternoon when the weather was good enough to be outside. Claire and her sister grew up in this house. Their heights were marked on the door frame in the pantry, pencil lines with names and years. I'd never painted over them. I couldn't. Her sister lived in Portland now, and we talked every Sunday, long calls that wandered across subjects the way good conversations do. She'd been clear about it. She was sorry she couldn't be closer. She made the distance feel smaller than it was. Claire was 40 minutes away and somehow felt farther. I wasn't keeping score, that's important to say. I wasn't running a tally in my head, marking down each slight and missed call and forgotten phone number. I'm not built that way. But sometimes you reach a moment where the accumulation becomes visible all at once. The way a room you've lived in for years suddenly looks different when the light comes through at a certain angle and you see the dust you'd stopped registering. The angle had shifted. I went back to the kitchen and started on the filling. Thanksgiving itself came on a cold, dry Thursday. I woke up at 6 the way I always do, habit overriding everything else, and lay in bed for a few minutes listening to the quiet. No footsteps. No smell of coffee already started by someone else. Just the house and the gray morning light and the sound of a car passing on the street outside. I got up, made my coffee, and started cooking. I don't entirely know why. Some part of me had considered not doing it, not going through the whole production for a table of one. But my hands had their own ideas, the way hands do when they've made the same things for 30 years. The turkey went in early. Sweet potatoes roasted with butter and a little maple syrup. Cranberry sauce from scratch, because the canned kind, I agree with Tyler, does taste like metal. Green beans with slivered almonds. No cream of mushroom soup, the real way. By noon, the house smelled like every Thanksgiving I'd ever known, like the good years and the leaner ones and all the years in between. Like Gerald in that pilgrim hat. Like Claire at 8 years old, standing in leaves up to her knees. My phone was quiet. No message from Claire, no call from Derek wishing me a happy holiday, which he used to do, back when things were warmer. I'd gotten a text from her sister that morning. "Thinking of you today, Mom. Call me later?" I'd sent back a heart and meant it. I made a plate for myself and sat at the table, which felt both too large and exactly the right size. I said a quiet grace, the way Gerald taught me. Just a few words, just acknowledgement, and then I ate my dinner in the November light coming through the window. I didn't cry. That surprised me, honestly. I'd expected to. What I felt instead was something more like clarity. Not happiness, not peace exactly, but the particular clearness that comes when you stop pretending something is one thing and let it be what it actually is. Halfway through the meal, my doorbell rang. I set down my fork and went to answer it, expecting a neighbor, maybe someone whose dog had gotten loose again. Instead, I found a boy I didn't immediately recognize, maybe 9 or 10 years old, in a jacket a little too thin for the weather, holding a covered plate. "Hi," he said. "I'm Caleb. I live down the street. My grandma sent this." He held out the plate. Under the foil, I could smell something good, something spiced. "Your grandmother? Mrs. Patricia Odom. She said you might not be having people over today, and she made extra sweet potato pie." He said it very seriously, like he'd been instructed carefully. "She said, please don't feel like you have to eat it right now if you're in the middle of something." I stood there for a moment. Patricia Odom lived 4 houses down. I knew her slightly. The way you know people in a neighborhood where everyone waves from driveways but rarely stops. She was widowed a few years before Gerald died, and we'd had a conversation about it once over her fence that had been more real than most conversations I'd had in months. "Please thank your grandmother for me," I said, "and tell her I was very much in the middle of something, but I might have room for pie." Caleb smiled, relieved of his mission. "She said if you want company later, she's watching the game, even though she doesn't understand football." I laughed despite myself. "Tell her I'll think about it." He went back down the front walk, the too thin jacket not quite covering his wrists, and I stood at the door for a moment after he'd gone, holding a plate of sweet potato pie from a woman I barely knew, feeling something shift in my chest like a window being opened in a room that hadn't had air in a while. I went back inside, cleared my plate, and cut myself a slice of Patricia's pie. It was excellent. The next morning I made a phone call I'd been thinking about for longer than I'd admitted to myself. I'd found the paperwork the week before, going through a file drawer I'd been meaning to organize since spring. A co-signer agreement from 4 years ago, when Claire and Derek had needed help qualifying for their current car loan. I'd signed without much thought. They were my daughter and son-in-law. Of course I signed. What I hadn't fully registered at the time was that my name was still attached to that loan. 4 years later, still attached, still technically responsible if they ever stopped paying. I'd checked the statements periodically in the beginning, then stopped, telling myself they were fine, they'd figured things out, there was no need to hover. I called the lending company that Friday morning, the day after Thanksgiving, a day I'd always called my quiet day, the day after the noise settles. I explained that I'd like to understand my options regarding the co-signer status. The woman on the phone was helpful and patient and walked me through the process. There were options. There were steps. It would take some time and some paperwork, but it was possible. I made an appointment. Then I called my attorney. I'd been putting off updating my will for 2 years, since Gerald's passing changed everything in it. I'd had every intention of getting to it. I just hadn't. Now I had reasons that felt more specific. The appointment was for the following Tuesday. I want to be clear about something, because I've thought about it carefully. I wasn't doing these things out of anger. I'd felt anger, yes, in quiet moments when I let myself. But what I was acting from was something different. More like the feeling of finally picking up something you've been carrying at an awkward angle and adjusting your grip. Relief. practicality. The simple recognition that things needed to be different. Claire called me that Sunday, which was unusual. She typically texted. "Hey, Mom. How was your Thanksgiving?" "It was good," I said, which was true. Quiet. "Derek's mom made this amazing pumpkin cheesecake," she said, and proceeded to describe it in detail. I listened. She didn't ask about mine. "How are the kids?" I asked. "Tyler has a tournament next weekend. Lily is obsessed with some craft thing, making these little figures out of clay." She paused. "Listen, I've been thinking. Maybe we should do something before Christmas. Have you over for dinner? It's been a while." "It has been a while," I agreed. "I'll text you some dates," she said. She never texted dates. I didn't expect her to, which is maybe the saddest part. The week after Thanksgiving, I started doing something I hadn't done in years. I started saying yes to things that had nothing to do with my daughter's family. My friend Barbara from church had been inviting me to her Tuesday night book club for 3 years running. I'd always had a reason not to come. Usually something vague about being tired, about being available in case the kids needed something. Available in case. I'd structured so much of my time around being available in case. I went to the book club. They were reading something I hadn't heard of, a novel about a woman running a lighthouse in the 1880s, and the conversation around Barbara's dining room table that Tuesday night was sharp and funny and full of disagreement, and I went home at 9:30 feeling more like myself than I had in a long time. I signed up for the following month, and the month after that, Patricia Odom and I had coffee the Saturday after Thanksgiving, which she proposed in a handwritten note dropped in my mailbox. Handwritten. I couldn't remember the last time I'd received a handwritten note from anyone under 75. We sat at her kitchen table for 2 hours and talked about nothing consequential and everything real. She'd been a school librarian for 30 years. She missed it the way you miss a language you used to dream in. She was teaching her grandson Caleb to play chess because, she said, nobody else in the family had the patience for it. "He beat me last week for the first time," she said, and she looked genuinely proud. "I didn't let him. He just did it." I told her about Gerald. She told me about her husband, Robert, who had died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning while making breakfast, and how she'd found him there in the kitchen, and how the hardest part wasn't the years after. It was that she'd never gotten to say a particular thing she'd been meaning to say for 2 weeks, and now never would. "What was it?" I asked. "I have no idea," she said. "Isn't that something? I can't remember, but I knew at the time that it was important." I thought about that for days. My attorney's appointment was on a Tuesday. I drove there in the same gray morning light I'd been waking to since November settled in, the trees bare now, the maples stripped of their red. The office was in a building downtown that Gerald and I had passed 100 times on the way to somewhere else. My attorney, a calm woman named Diane who'd helped me with Gerald's estate, asked me to describe what I was hoping to accomplish. I described it. She took notes. She didn't make any expression that suggested she found it unusual, which I appreciated. She'd seen enough of life in this office to understand that families were complicated and that paperwork was one of the few ways a person could be precise about their intentions. There were things I wanted to change. The allocation that had been structured with Claire's family primarily in mind, I wanted to redirect a meaningful portion of it. There was a scholarship fund at the elementary school where I'd volunteered for 6 years, the kind of school that needed every dollar. I'd thought about contributing before, but put it off. I stopped putting it off. I also wanted to set aside something specific for Caleb Odom, Patricia's grandson, not an inheritance, something more like a designated gift. He was teaching himself chess. He wore a jacket too thin for the weather and carried pie on behalf of his grandmother with the seriousness of someone who understood that kindness was a real job. He was 9 years old and already a better person than several adults I could name. Diane wrote everything down and told me she'd have documents ready for review by the end of the month. I thanked her and drove home through the bare November streets feeling, again, that shift in the chest. Not lightness exactly, more like correctness. Like a thing put back in its proper place. Claire called 2 days later. It was an evening call, which was also unusual. I was sitting in the armchair by the window, reading, when my phone lit up with her name. I answered. "Hey, Mom." Her voice had a quality I recognized, stretched thin, carefully measured. "I was just calling to check in." "Good," I said. "How's everyone?" "Good, good. Tyler's tournament went well. He scored twice." A pause. "Hey, I had a question. I was going through some paperwork and I wanted to make sure everything is still set up the way it was. With the accounts, the stuff you and Dad had arranged. Derek and I were just making sure our records matched up." There it was. I kept my voice even. "Is there something specific you're looking at?" "Just the general setup," she said. "We want to make sure we have the right information. You should talk to my attorney if you have specific questions," I said. "She can tell you what's current." A longer pause. Did something change? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the grocery list folded under the notepad, the turkey reservation, the sweet potato pie in a foil-covered plate carried down the street by a 9-year-old boy in a thin jacket, the book club, Patricia's kitchen table. 2 hours of real conversation. "A few things," I said. "Nothing to worry about." "Mom," her voice had changed, lower now, more careful. "Did you change something? With the will?" "Claire," I said gently. "I love you, you know that. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't understand what's going on." And this is the thing I'd been thinking about, the piece I'd been turning over for weeks. How do you explain to someone that they've been treating you like a convenience for so long that they didn't notice? How do you point to the accumulated weight without it sounding like an accusation, without it becoming a fight that ends with slammed doors and years of silence? I didn't want a fight. I didn't want years of silence. I just wanted to be seen. "Do you remember," I said, "the Thanksgiving when Tyler was 4? He knocked over the gravy boat and started crying, and your father got down on the floor with him and made it into a whole game. Pretended the floor was a swimming pool and the gravy was the water. Tyler laughed so hard he forgot he'd been crying." "I remember," she said softly. "I think about that sometimes, how your father knew how to do that, how to take a moment that was going the wrong direction and just change it." I paused. "I've been trying to do that for a long time on my own. Take the moments that were going wrong and find another way through." "Mom, I'm not angry, sweetheart. I want you to hear that. I'm not making a list of grievances. I'm 67 years old. I buried your father. I've given everything I had to give every time it was asked of me, and a lot of times it wasn't. And this Thanksgiving, I sat at my table alone and ate a beautiful meal and had pie brought to me by a child I barely knew, and I felt more seen in those 2 hours than I had in a long time." The line was very quiet. "I didn't know you were alone," she said finally. "I thought you'd have people." "You didn't ask," I said, not accusingly, just as a fact. Another silence. Longer this time. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything tonight. But Claire, I need you to understand that I'm not the same as I was. I'm not going to be available in case. I'm going to be living my actual life, with people who think to ask. And I very much hope that you'll want to be part of that." She didn't respond right away. I could hear her breathing, and behind it, faintly, the sound of the television in another room, Derek and the kids in the background of her life. I thought about Tyler scoring twice at his tournament. I thought about Lily and her clay figures. I missed them in a way that sat low and heavy and wouldn't be going anywhere. "I'll call you this week," she said finally. "Can we do that? Can we actually talk?" "I'd like that," I said. We said goodnight. I set the phone on the side table and looked out the window. The streetlights had come on, orange and steady in the cold. A car moved slowly past. Somewhere down the block, I could see the lights in Patricia's front window. I thought about what Patricia had said, the thing she couldn't remember, the important thing that never got said. I picked up my phone again and sent Claire a text. Just 3 words. I love you." She sent back a heart within a minute. It wasn't resolution. I'm not naive enough to think one phone call reroutes years of accumulated distance. Real things take time and honesty, and more than one hard conversation. I knew that going in, but it was a beginning, or the possibility of one. That was enough for tonight. The days after that took on a different texture. I stopped waiting. I stopped arranging myself around absences, stopped leaving mental space for calls that didn't come, stopped measuring my weeks by what didn't happen. Instead, I filled them differently. Barbara's book club, coffee with Patricia, which became a standing thing, Saturday mornings, her kitchen or mine, a watercolor class at the community center that I'd dismissed for years as not being for me, which turned out to be very much for me. Caleb came over one afternoon to show me his chess set, a small wooden one that had belonged to his grandfather, and I learned the names of the pieces and lost twice and didn't mind even a little. He was serious about it in the way children are serious about the things they've chosen for themselves. He explained the moves with patience, like a small professor, and when I made a bad decision with my bishop, he looked at me with genuine concern. "You'll get it," he said. "It took me a while too. I have time," I said. And I meant it differently than I used to. Time used to feel like something I was managing, fitting things into, making sure the calendar was structured around the people who might need me. Now it felt like something else, something that was mine. I signed the paperwork with Diane in December, a gray Wednesday morning. She went through everything clearly, and I initialed where I was supposed to, and signed where I was supposed to, and when it was done, I sat with the copies in my lap for a moment before sliding them into the folder she'd given me. "Is there anything else?" Diane asked. "No," I said. "I think that covers it." I drove home the long way, past the school where I'd volunteered, where a hand-lettered sign in the window said, "Readers make great leaders," in letters that had faded just slightly at the edges. Past the bakery on the corner where Gerald and I used to stop on Sunday mornings before his heart gave out. Past the park where Tyler had learned to ride a bike, where I'd run alongside him for 2 whole afternoons until he suddenly, miraculously, didn't need me running anymore. The thing about loving people is that it doesn't require their permission, and it doesn't go away when they stop seeing you. I still loved my daughter. I still loved my grandchildren who were growing up in a house where I was increasingly more of a memory than a presence. That love wasn't contingent on being needed. It didn't work that way. But love is not the same as erasure. You can love someone completely and still refuse to disappear for their convenience. You can love someone and still insist on your own existence. That was the thing I was still learning at 67, with leaves off the maple and winter settling hard against the windows. Claire came for dinner the second week of December. Just her, not Derek or the kids, just my daughter sitting across my kitchen table the way she used to before she had a family of her own, before the world filled up around her. I made her favorite roasted chicken with the lemon and herbs she always asked for, rice, a green salad. She hugged me when she came in, a real hug, longer than usual. We talked for 3 hours. It wasn't easy. There were parts where her voice got tight and parts where mine did too, and at one point she cried a little and said, "I didn't know you felt invisible. I really didn't know." And I believed her. That was the hardest part of all, not that she'd done it deliberately, but that it had happened so gradually, neither of us had noticed, until the distance was long enough to see. "I want to do better," she said. "I want to actually try." "I know," I said. "I want that too." She helped me with the dishes before she left, the way she used to when she was young, and the rule was that whoever didn't cook had to clean. She knew where everything went. She'd grown up in this kitchen. She knew the cabinet with the good glasses and the drawer where the dish towels were, and the exact angle you had to hold the strainer for it to sit right in the sink. At the door, she turned back. "Mom, the thing with the will. I want you to know I understand why you did it. I don't love it, but I understand." I looked at my daughter in my doorway, my girl who used to stand in a pile of leaves laughing at something off camera. The person I'd built my adult life around, in ways I was only now fully comprehending. It wasn't about punishing anyone, I said. It was about deciding what I actually valued, where I actually wanted things to go. She nodded slowly. The school? That's a good one. Dad would have liked that. I know, I said. That's part of why I chose it. She left. I stood in the open door and watched her car back down the driveway and disappear down the street. The cold came in around me and I let it for a moment before I closed the door and went back inside. The house was the same house it had always been. Same floors, same photographs, same height marks on the pantry door frame, same hum from the refrigerator, same maple out back, bare against the winter sky. But I moved through it differently now. With less apology, with less of that particular held breath quality of waiting for something that might not come. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the armchair by the window and watched the street go dark. Later that week, Patricia and I were going to her church's Christmas concert, which she said was wonderful in a slightly chaotic way. Caleb was playing the trumpet, she'd told me, for the first time in public, and he was nervous, and she was bringing extra Kleenex for herself. I was looking forward to it. If you have ever set a table for people who don't come, if you have ever wrapped something carefully and carried it somewhere it wasn't wanted, if you have ever held the phone and waited for it to ring and told yourself that next time they'll remember, then you know the weight I'm describing. You know it in your hands and in the specific silence of certain rooms. What I want you to understand is that putting that weight down is not betrayal. It is not hardness. It is not giving up on the people you love. It is simply choosing to exist fully in the time you have left. It is deciding that your presence is worth something, not as a resource, not as a support structure, but as a human being who still has things to learn and places to go and people to sit with on Saturday mornings. You do not need a dramatic moment to start. You do not need anyone to acknowledge what was taken from you. You only need to begin, quietly, in whatever kitchen you happen to be standing in, with whatever is already in your hands. That is enough. You are enough. You always were.